The courtroom was unusually full that morning. People shuffled in their seats, whispering softly as the hum of quiet conversations filled the air. The heavy wooden doors creaked open now and then,
You laugh,
letting in small
because my
bursts of
words
cold
sound
air
different.
and curiosity.
But my
Everyone
truth
seemed to be waiting for
is the
something
same as
or
yours.
someone to make the day
And at that
interesting.
point,
At the
he
front,
became
Judge Harrison
visibly
adjusted his
agitated
glasses
and
glanced
started
down at
yelling.
the pile of files on his desk. He was known for his strictness and his impatience. To him, cases were numbers, people were pages, and emotions, they were distractions from the law. But today he was about to learn that some stories can't be measured by procedure. The clerk's voice broke the stillness. Case number 2478, State versus Maria Alvarez. A woman stood from the defendant's table. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, dressed in a simple blue blouse and black skirt that looked one size too big. Her dark hair was tied neatly back, though a few strands had escaped, framing her nervous face. She clutched a small folder, worn, bent at the corners, held like something precious. Maria Alvarez took a deep breath. It was quiet enough to hear it. When she spoke, her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from carefulness. "Good morning, Your Honor," she said, her accent thick but her tone gentle, respectful. A few people in the gallery smirked. One man near the back chuckled under his breath. Even the prosecutor, a young man in a sharp suit, looked down with a faint grin. The judge raised an eyebrow, almost amused. Judge Harrison leaned back. "Good morning, Ms. Alvarez," he said in a tone that balanced politeness with boredom. "Please take your seat." As she sat, he shuffled his papers again. "You are charged with obstruction and disorderly conduct related to an incident at the Maplewood construction site, correct?" "Yes, sir," she replied. Her words were slightly mispronounced but perfectly understandable. Still, a small wave of quiet laughter rippled from the gallery again. She looked around, confused, unsure what was funny. Her eyes darted between faces, then back to the judge. The judge cleared his throat, pretending not to notice. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, "do you understand the charges against you?" Maria nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, but I didn't do wrong. I tried to help." The judge blinked, mildly amused. "Help? You were accused of interfering with security and blocking workers from entering the site." "Yes," she said softly, "but they were hurting people." I tried to explain, but nobody listened. Her lawyer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, shifted in his seat. "Your Honor," he interjected quickly, "my client has limited English proficiency. I'll be assisting with clarification as needed." The judge gave a half-smile. "I think we'll manage." Then something subtle happened. As Maria began to explain what had happened, her words came out haltingly, a pause between each phrase, as if she were searching for the right English words. "I was there because my brother, he worked there. He's called me. See, someone got hurt." The courtroom's quiet changed. Some people leaned in. Others hid smiles behind their hands. The judge let out a faint, audible chuckle, not cruel but careless. The kind of laugh that says, "This is going to be long." Maria's hands trembled. She looked down, her face flushing with embarrassment. Her accent wasn't something she could hide. It was the sound of who she was. Every rolled R, every missing article, a reflection of the language she learned late at night. After long shifts cleaning offices, she looked up at the judge again, her eyes clearer now. "Your Honor," she said slowly, her voice steadier, "I may no speak perfect, but I tell truth." The judge froze, surprised by her tone. The prosecutor straightened his tie. The laughter stopped. There was something in the way she said it, something unshakable. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. The air changed, heavy and still. Everyone could feel it, the quiet power behind her trembling voice. And as the judge leaned forward slightly, curious now instead of amused, Maria continued softly, "You laugh, because my words sound different. But my truth, it's same as yours." The courtroom didn't move, even the clicking of the clerk's keyboard stopped. The judge's face, once calm and superior, shifted. His lips parted slightly, not for another chuckle this time, but in disbelief. That was the moment the laughter died completely, and though no one knew it yet, what Maria was about to say next would echo beyond that courtroom, a sentence that would change not just her case, but the hearts of everyone watching. Maria kept her palms flat on the table, as if the wood could steady her. The room had changed. The quiet wasn't bored anymore. It was listening. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered, "Take your time." She nodded once. "I came here 12 years ago," she said. "I didn't know how to say hello. I learned from TV, bus stop cards, and people. I learned by saying things wrong many times. A few people in the gallery looked up. No one laughed. I wanted quiet, she said. Back home it was noisy at night. Trucks, arguments, sometimes gunshots. I wanted a place that let you breathe. She remembered the first night in the small apartment over a laundromat, the warm soap smell, a fan rattling in the window. She and her younger brother, Luis, lay on the floor, listening to the city hum like a steady engine. Sirens came and went, but there were rules here. Lights turned red, then green, like a heartbeat that kept time. I cleaned offices at night, she said. I carried a small dictionary. On breaks, I opened it. I put sticky notes on new words. Receipt, schedule, supervisor, permission. The words to keep a job. Sometimes the notes fell off. She taped them back on. The pages shined with layers of tape. Luis was smart, she said. He learned fast. He started construction. He said good money. Maybe a car one day. He sent money home. He wore his helmet, his vest. He called me on lunch breaks and said, I'm high up today. The view is nice. I told him, don't look down. We laughed. Her mouth softened on that last word. Then one day he didn't laugh, she said. He told me a man fell the day before. The harness was old. People complained. No one listened. They were told to hurry. A woman yelled at the gate about dust and her child. Security told her to go away. The judge had stopped writing. He watched her. In my country, Maria said, people say go away when they don't want to share bread. Here, sometimes they say it when they don't want to share time. But time is also bread. If you give time, you feed people. You let them speak. She folded her fingers together. On the day they say I obstructed, Luis called again. There was an argument at the gate. Some workers didn't want to go in. The scaffolding looked wrong. The foreman said it was fine. Security told everyone to move. She saw it again. Metal shining in hot sun, lunch pails swinging, dust lifting in swirls. A mother held a child's hand. The child coughed into a scarf. I went there, she said. Not as a lawyer. As a sister. I stood near the gate and said, please slow down. Someone will get hurt. Her voice did not shake now. They said I was blocking. Maybe I was. I stood where they could see me. I wanted them to look. She let that sit. I didn't push anyone, she said. I didn't grab anyone. I held a phone. I said I would call the city. I said I would call the news. My voice is small. A phone makes it bigger. The prosecutor's pen scratched once, then stopped. Security came, Maria said. They have orders. I pointed to the scaffolding and said, look at the bolts. See the dark color? That is rust. I asked for masks. The dust was strong. The wind was strong. The child kept coughing. I used some wrong words. I called a bracket a buckle. I called a clamp a clip. People laughed. She looked down at her hands. Sometimes it is easier to laugh than to listen when someone uses the wrong word. But the meaning was right. A woman in the back nodded. Luis told me his boss said, if you want to be treated like a pro, talk like a pro. Luis came home angry. He said, I know tools, not speeches. I told him, your hands are the speech. She glanced at the small folder by her elbow. When the police arrived, I stepped back. I raised my hands. I said, I just want them to check. One officer looked tired. One looked angry. They told me to move. I moved. But I could see the workers watching me. And I could hear the scaffold when the wind hit it. Metal talks if you listen, rattles when it's tired. It groans when it isn't tight. A small ripple of discomfort moved through the benches. I stepped forward again, she said. A hand pushed my shoulder, not hard. Enough to say, you do not belong here. My words came out tangled. I said, I'm not disorderly. The disorder is there, and I pointed to the scaffold. I said, the danger is there, and I pointed to the dust. Maybe I didn't use the right legal words, but I used the right heart words. Please check. Please slow down. Please do not hurry people into danger. She lifted her eyes to the judge. I'm here because they say I obstructed. Maybe I did. I tried to block harm. If that is a crime, then I am guilty of asking people to look for one more minute. Silence settled again. The courtroom felt smaller, like everyone had leaned in without moving. My accent does not change the shape of truth, she said. It only changes the sound. When I say please, I mean it. When I say danger, I know it. Where I come from, you learn the meaning of danger before you learn the word. She opened the folder and removed a few printed photos. Grainy images. Cheap paper. These are from my phone, she said. I took them before I was arrested. See the bolts? See the dark? See the dust on the mask? See the date? She pointed to the timestamp. Same day. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, we haven't. Maria kept her eyes on the judge. I brought pictures because I knew my words might not be enough. Not in the right shape. Not in the right suit. Here, truth often needs a picture. Her lawyer stood careful. Your Honor, we'll move to enter these at the proper time. For now, we ask the court to acknowledge they exist. The judge nodded, slow, thoughtful. Luis told me that morning, she said, her voice lower, that the wind was stronger than yesterday. His harness clicked in a new way. He said, maybe I'm just nervous. I told him, be nervous. Nervous keeps you careful. He laughed a little. Then he said, I have to go. The line went quiet. She looked down for a long second. No one spoke. You heard laughter when I spoke earlier, she said. It's okay. I've heard it before, but I want you to hear his last words too. I have to go. That is the voice I carried to the gate when I said, please wait. Please check. Please live. Her final word hung in the air. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Alvarez, he said quietly, go on. Maria drew a breath. What happened next, she said, is why I could not move, and the room, now fully still, waited for the part of her story that would explain everything. The room shifted back to small sounds, a pen tapping 2 seats from the jury box, the low buzz of fluorescent lights, the sigh of paper sliding under a palm. After Maria's last answer, people had gone quiet in a different way. Not the silence of boredom, but the silence that listens. Didn't last. Judge Harrison checked the clock. His patience wore a neat path across his face. Counsel, he said to the prosecutor, go ahead. The prosecutor rose, tie straight, voice smooth. He smiled the kind of smile that practiced kindness like a performance. Ms. Alvarez, he began, you gave us many colorful descriptions. Wind that groans, metal that talks, time that is bread. But we're here for facts. A few lips twitched. Someone's pen clicked twice. Maria folded her hands. I have facts, she said softly. He lifted one of her grainy photos between 2 fingers. This is a picture of metal taken on a phone. You're not an engineer, correct? No, I'm a cleaner. And a sister. A cleaner, he repeated, letting the word shrink her. Not trained to judge scaffolding. Yet you told security the bolts were tired. He made air quotes. A small stifled chuckle escaped the back row. Maria kept her eyes steady. I told them to look. I asked for time. You asked for time, he said, by standing at a gate and blocking workers. Yes, I stood where they could see me. Where ignoring would be harder. Across the gallery, a whisper skated between 2 people. The judge tapped his pen once. How many minutes? The prosecutor asked. I don't know. Long enough to be heard. Not long enough to be, a yes or no will do, he cut in. It is the truth, she said. He glanced at the judge. Your Honor, could the witness answer directly? Ms. Alvarez, the judge said, voice cool. Answer what's asked. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecutor adjusted his papers. The yellow page caught the light. You held a phone and threatened to call the city and the press in imperfect English. Do you think that caused confusion? People understood me well enough to laugh. The tapping stopped. No one smiled. You testified a guard touched your shoulder. Did you push back? No. Raise your voice. I raised my concern. After being told to move, did you step forward again? Yes. So you escalated. She tilted her head. I chose to be seen. He sighed. You speak of dust and coughing. Do you have medical training to say it was harmful? No, I have lungs. A few people exhaled at once. The judge's eyes flicked toward the benches, warning enough to settle the room. Construction sites are busy. The prosecutor went on. Outsiders create hazards by interfering. Agreed. Speed can be a hazard, Maria said. Ignoring can be a hazard. A harness can be old. A bolt can be tired. A person becomes disposable if no one speaks. The judge's knee bounced once, barely. He rotated the pen in his fingers like it might help the day move faster. Ms. Alvarez, he said, keep to the question. I try, Your Honor, but the question keeps stepping on the truth. A stretch of uncomfortable smiles. A cough pressed flat. The prosecutor softened his tone. No one doubts your feelings. But this court weighs conduct. You obstructed. You admit you stood where workers had to pass. You admit you didn't leave when told. Why isn't that disorderly? Because disorder was already there, she said. I didn't bring it. I pointed at it. He let silence hover, waiting for her words to collapse. They didn't. In the first row, a woman removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly. A bailiff shifted. Somewhere, a phone vibrated and then went quiet, embarrassed. About your brother, the prosecutor continued. He called you afraid. Did he ask you to show up and block the gate? He asked me to listen, to be careful, to hear the sound of the day. Did he ask you to come? No, that was my choice. A poor one? I don't agree. He tapped his legal pad, annoyed at the answer that refused to fit. You said truth needs a picture here, but your photos prove only that you were close enough to interfere. They don't prove rust or danger. Isn't that right? They prove I was looking, she said. Not that you were right. I didn't need to be right to ask for time, she said. I needed to be human. Move to strike is non-responsive, he said. Denied, Judge Harrison said too quickly and then softened. The answer stands. The prosecutor recalibrated. English is not your first language. No, Your Honor, Maria answered, eyes still on the prosecutor. So misunderstandings were possible, the judge added. Possible about phrasing, she said. Not about danger, the judge's mouth twitched. Do you see how your phrases could sound dramatic? Tired metal. Bread time. A hush of laughter slid around the room, subtle, quick, unkind in its smallness. The sound touched Maria like cold air. She did not flinch. My words are different, she said quietly. My meaning is clear. The judge straightened, impatience cooling into formality. Proceed. The prosecutor turned to his last notes. Company logs show 15 minutes lost at the gate. Is that acceptable? If 15 minutes prevents one fall, it isn't lost. You don't make that call, he snapped. Foremen do. Inspectors do. Not you. That's why I asked them to look, she said. I asked the people who make calls. And when they didn't, you made yourself the call. I made myself the pause, she said. He frowned. The word didn't fit his outline. He closed the folder. No further questions. He sat. The pen tapping returned back to its nervous beat. Maria's lawyer stood slowly. He smoothed his tie. Redirect, Your Honor. Briefly, the judge said. The defense attorney kept his voice even. Ms. Alvarez, when you stood at the gate, what did you want most? To be heard. If the foreman had checked the scaffold, handed out masks, paused for 15 minutes, what would you have done? I would have gone home, she said. I would have baked bread. A small smile flickered in the second row and died, not out of mockery, but because the image felt too gentle for the room. One more, he said. The prosecutor questioned your words. What do you want the court to understand about using the wrong ones? She looked at her hands, then up. A wrong word can still point in the right direction. A quiet murmur moved. Not agreement, not dissent, just notice. No further questions, the defense said, and sat. Judge Harrison studied Maria like a problem that had changed shape mid-solution. He glanced at the file, at the photos, at the clock. His pen hovered above the page and did not land. Ms. Alvarez, he said, formal now. You may step down. Maria didn't move. She looked at the photos, then at the judge, then at the people who had laughed, and then stopped. Her voice, when it came, was steady. Your Honor, may I say one sentence for the record? The pen tapping stopped. The whispers folded themselves shut. Even the lights seemed to quiet. The judge paused. You may. Maria drew a measured breath, lifted her chin, and prepared to speak her next sentence. For a long breath, nothing moved. The pen froze in the judge's hand, hovering over the page like a bird that didn't trust the ground. The gallery leaned forward without meaning to. Somewhere a chair creaked and then held its breath too. Maria stood with her fingers on the back of the witness chair, as if touching wood helped her balance on the edge between silence and speech. She looked at the judge, then at the rows of faces, and said carefully, like she was placing a bowl on a shelf that could break, If my English sounds broken to you, it is because I picked the words up while I was holding other things together. The sentence entered the room like a quiet bell. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It found corners. It found ears. It found the place beneath the ribs where we keep the parts of ourselves we don't show in court. No one laughed. Maria's voice trembled on the first few words that followed, then steadied. You hear my accent and think I don't understand. But I understand work. I understand fear. I understand how a harness should sound when it clicks. I understand how dust sits in a child's lungs and makes a small night inside their chest. She swallowed. The microphone didn't catch it. The room did. I am here because I love someone who goes up where the wind pulls people in directions no feet can argue with. I am here because my brother called me, and I heard the fear like a second voice inside his first one. I am here because a woman outside a gate held her child and tried to swallow her cough, so men in vests would not feel guilty. She glanced at the photos on the table, then left them there like proof that could wait its turn. You ask me for facts, she said. Here are facts. The man who fell the day before was named Arturo. He was 52. He has a scar on his shoulder that looks like a smile the skin forgot to finish. He was alive when they put him in the ambulance. He told my brother to be careful. He told him the harnesses were older than some of the men wearing them. He did not come back to work. A sound like paper being folded came from the second row and then stopped, as if the person remembered that the room had ears and a heart. You ask me how long I stood there, she continued. I stood for the length of one lunch break cut short, for the length of a coffee swallowed in 3 gulps because the foreman said hurry, for the length of a harness buckle that did not want to close on the first try. Her hands unclasped and then came back together, small birds that knew the way to the branch and trusted it. You ask me why I came, she said, slower now, and I tell you I came because I have learned the sound of danger better than the shape of the word. I came because in my first apartment the fire alarm shouted in English, and I could not read the instructions, but I could smell the smoke and I knew what to do. I came because Ms. Lee from down the hall once asked me to call 911 for her husband, and I was afraid my words would fall apart. But I said pain and now and please, and the ambulance came anyway. She looked at the prosecutor without anger. I don't know the names of all the metal parts. I know the names of things I carry every day: keys, lunch, rent, worry. A faint hiss from the vents grazed the ceiling. The flags at the bench barely moved. The judge asked me about misunderstanding, she said, turning back to the bench. Yes, I misunderstand sometimes. I have asked for flour at a store when I needed flour for bread. The cashier laughed. I laughed too. It is a small kind of hurt that we cover with a small kind of smile. But there are other misunderstandings that are not small. There is the misunderstanding that speed is strength. There is the misunderstanding that silence is consent. There is the misunderstanding that an accent means there is nothing inside the words. Her voice, still soft, now carried like a low river carries a leaf. Steady and sure. I cleaned offices at night for many years. I learned that the people who leave the biggest messes wear the nicest shoes. I learned that when you clean around a desk, you see the notes that someone wrote to themselves in the corner of a page. Call mom. Fix part. Don't forget. I learned that the people who talk the loudest in meetings sometimes forget the small notes that matter most. She turned her palm up, empty, as if offering the room a place to put its attention. My small note is this: the day at the gate the wind was strong. The scaffold rattled where it should have hummed. The dust made a white cloud over the ground like a ghost trying to remember how to be a body. Men coughed into their sleeves and pretended they didn't. A child coughed into a scarf and couldn't pretend. She took a breath and let it out slowly. The air in the room moved with her. I am not a foreman, she said. I'm not an inspector. I am a person who stood where looking would be easier than ignoring. If that is obstruction, then maybe we should call every stop sign an arrest. Maybe we should call every red light disorderly. Someone's throat cleared and then went quiet, embarrassed at being a sound at all. You say I delayed work by 15 minutes, she said. You count money by minutes. I count brothers by breaths. If you had paused, maybe someone would have noticed the bolt with the wrong color, the harness with the click that felt like doubt, the mask with dust already living in its fabric. If you had paused, maybe the day would have learned humility and put its head down for a little while, her accent wrapped around the words like a ribbon that wasn't made for the box but made it beautiful anyway. You laughed when I said, time is bread, she added, not accusing, just naming. I meant that time feeds people. Time lets a mother finish explaining. Time lets a worker adjust his strap. Time lets a judge read a file twice instead of once. She looked at Judge Harrison, not challenging him, just seeing him. You have seen many cases. People become pages. I understand. You have to move quickly or the day will carry you like a river. But if people are pages, then please read us slowly. We are written in more than one language. The judge's pen lowered to the paper and then lifted again without writing. I stand for this, Maria said, for pauses that keep people alive, for the right to be heard even if the words wear old shoes, for the belief that safety is not a luxury that belongs to those who speak without mistakes. The wind does not check your grammar before it knocks you sideways. The ground does not spell your name before it takes your weight. She touched the edge of one photo with a fingertip, not lifting it. I brought pictures because I know how it feels when truth arrives without a suit, and people don't open the door. I brought pictures because sometimes the door opens for paper before it opens for people. I do not blame you for that. I only learned the rule and decided to use it. Her lawyer didn't move. The prosecutor didn't either. The bailiff's hands folded and refolded with the quiet precision of someone pretending to be a statue. You can decide I broke the law, she said, voice level. You can decide I stood in the wrong place for the right reasons, and that the wrong place matters more. You can decide I made a scene in a place where scenes make money and that is not allowed. But you cannot decide that what I pointed at was nothing. Because even if my words were clumsy, my eyes were not. She lifted her chin a small degree. The movement felt like opening a window. I am not asking you to like me, she said. I am asking you to listen to the shape of my care. I am asking you to hear my brother's last words to me that morning. I have to go, and understand that I stood at the gate to keep those 4 words from being the last words for someone else. Silence rose like a tide. I do not want to be a hero, she added gently. I want construction workers to be old one day. I want mothers to stop coughing into scarves. I want the rattling things to rest. I want the tired things to be repaired. I want men who make schedules to add a line that says, pause. Her voice softened further, almost a whisper that reached every seat. And I want you to know that when you laughed, I did not break. I chose not to. Because there is a difference between being laughed at and being wrong, and I am tired of those two being mistaken for the same thing. She let the words settle. No pen tapped. No shoe shifted. The fluorescent buzz shrank to a thin thread, and then to nothing that anyone could hear. Maria nodded once as if agreeing with the room that it was allowed to be quiet now. That is all, she said. That is my truth. She sat. The judge's pen finally touched the page, drew a line that wasn't a word, lifted, hovered, and then found nothing to write. His mouth opened slightly and closed again. He blinked as if the light had changed. A long beat passed, the kind you do not measure with a clock. In that stillness, bias had nothing to push against. It simply slipped off like rain from a warmed window. The bailiff looked at the floor. The prosecutor stared at his notes as if they had been written by a stranger. Maria's lawyer folded his hands and did not speak. No one cleared a throat. No one coughed. No one searched their bag for a candy that would crinkle. The room remained hushed, like a church that hadn't planned to be one. Even the judge couldn't meet her eyes. The silence stayed longer than anyone expected. It had weight, like fog thick enough to breathe in. When sound returned, it came slowly. The soft scratch of a pen, the faint shuffle of papers, the sigh of someone realizing they had been holding their breath for too long. Judge Harrison's voice broke the quiet. It wasn't sharp anymore. Ms. Alvarez, he said carefully. Thank you. He cleared his throat, but it didn't erase the tremor in it. Counsel will take a short recess. The gavel struck once. But it didn't echo with authority this time. It sounded human, almost reluctant. When the courtroom emptied for the break, people moved differently. No one whispered. The laughter that had floated earlier was gone, replaced by the quiet of thought. Even the prosecutor, who had sat straight-backed and confident all morning, now leaned forward with his pen resting still, eyes distant. Maria stayed seated. Her lawyer leaned close. You did more than testify, he said softly. You made them see. She gave a small smile, not pride, but peace. I didn't come to fight, she said. I came to finish explaining. When court resumed, the energy had shifted. The prosecutor stood again, slower this time. He didn't look at Maria when he spoke. Your Honor, the state requests permission to recall one of the security witnesses. The guard who had testified earlier, a tall man with a tight jaw, returned to the stand. He kept his eyes down when Maria passed him. Mr. Doyle, the prosecutor began. Earlier you stated that Ms. Alvarez refused to comply with police instructions. Yes, sir, the man said quietly. After hearing her testimony, do you wish to clarify anything? The guard hesitated. The pause stretched. Then he exhaled. She didn't yell. She didn't push. She stood there. She just kept saying, please wait, over and over. I remember now. It wasn't anger. It was, he stopped. It was something else. Something else. He looked at the judge. Fear. Not for herself. The prosecutor nodded once, then sat down without another question. Maria's lawyer rose next. Your Honor, he said, The defense would like to submit a follow-up statement from the construction company's safety inspector. He handed a single page to the clerk. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and read. The silence grew heavy again. The statement was short, just a paragraph written after the incident. A section of the scaffolding on the west side was found to have loose bolts and visible corrosion. Work was temporarily halted for inspection later that afternoon. The date matched the day Maria had been arrested. A ripple went through the room. Not noise, but the kind of sound that comes from realization. The judge looked up slowly. His voice was softer than before. So she was right, he said, almost to himself. Her lawyer didn't answer. He didn't need to. Maria sat still, hands folded, gaze low. The prosecutor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. For the first time all day, the courtroom didn't feel divided, just small and quiet, as if everyone was standing in the same space for once. Judge Harrison set the paper aside and looked at Maria. Ms. Alvarez, he said, this court owes you fairness. It also owes you respect. Thank you for reminding us what that looks like. Maria nodded politely. Thank you, Your Honor. Her voice was soft, but the meaning landed like a steady heartbeat. The judge leaned back, his pen still in his hand but motionless. Court will reconvene tomorrow for the verdict, he said. As people stood to leave, no one looked at Maria with pity anymore. They looked at her the way people look at something they almost missed, like sunlight breaking through after a long cloud. The truth was out now, but truth wasn't always the same as justice. As Maria gathered her folder and stepped away from the table, a question hung in the air, one that no one dared to say out loud yet. Would the system that had laughed at her be willing to listen when it mattered most? The next morning, the courthouse felt different. The air didn't buzz the way it had before. It moved slower, heavier. Even the footsteps in the hallway seemed quieter, like people didn't want to disturb what was coming. Maria sat at the defense table, her blue blouse freshly pressed, the same one she'd worn every hearing before. Her small folder rested neatly before her, its corners bent, its papers worn thin. Her lawyer sat beside her, flipping through notes he didn't really need anymore. Everything that mattered had already been said. When Judge Harrison entered, everyone rose. His robe seemed to hang a little differently on him. Not lighter, but less certain, as if it carried the weight of what he'd heard the day before. He nodded once, motioned for everyone to sit, and looked down at the case file. Before we proceed to the verdict, he said, I'll allow closing statements. The prosecutor stood first. His voice was measured, professional, but the usual confidence had cracks now. Your Honor, he began, no one questions Ms. Alvarez's intentions. Her love for her brother, her concern for others, those are clear. But the law does not judge intentions. It judges actions. And her actions obstructed a worksite. They delayed operations and defied instruction. We ask the court to uphold the statute as written. He sat, his words fading into the air like smoke that didn't want to linger. Maria's lawyer rose slowly. He didn't shuffle papers or clear his throat. He just looked at the judge, then at Maria. Your Honor, he began quietly. Yesterday, this courtroom witnessed something rare. Honesty that didn't need perfect grammar to be powerful. My client didn't come here to argue the law. She came here to remind us what the law was made for. He paused, letting that hang. She stood at that gate because no one else did. She saw danger where others saw routine. And yes, she broke a rule. But rules mean nothing if they silence what's right. The law was never meant to protect convenience over conscience. He glanced at Maria, his tone softening. She's been laughed at for the way she speaks, doubted for where she was born, and dismissed for what she looks like. Yet she stood taller than anyone else in this room when she spoke her truth. Turning back to the judge, he finished, If justice means anything, it must mean we hear the heart behind the words, not just the words themselves. Ms. Alvarez didn't disrupt order. She restored humanity. And if that's a crime, Your Honor, then the rest of us have a lot more to answer for than she does. The room was still again. Judge Harrison's fingers traced the edge of his gavel. He looked down at the file, but he wasn't reading anymore. He was remembering. The laughter, the accent, the way she'd said, please, wait, check, live. When he finally spoke, his voice was slower. The court is tasked with applying the law, he said. But sometimes the law needs to be reminded why it exists. Ms. Alvarez's actions technically meet the description of obstruction, but to call them that without context would be to strip them of meaning. He looked at her directly now, not through her file. You acted out of fear, not selfish fear, but human fear for others. You stood where the law told you not to, because your conscience told you to. That is not disorderly conduct. That is moral courage. The prosecutor shifted in his chair but didn't speak. Judge Harrison set his pen down, folded his hands, and took a deep breath. This court finds Ms. Alvarez not guilty of obstruction and disorderly conduct. A sound, a collective exhale, moved through the courtroom like wind through leaves. Maria didn't move at first. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked at the judge, eyes glistening, but her smile was small, humble. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. The judge nodded once. "No, Ms. Alvarez, thank you." He leaned back, gaze unfocused for a moment. "You reminded me," he said softly, "that the law isn't just rules written on paper. It's people. And sometimes the people teach us how to read it again." The bailiff announced that court was adjourned. Chairs scraped lightly as people rose. The prosecutor approached Maria, hesitated, then simply said, "You were right about the scaffolding." She nodded once, not in victory but in understanding. As the room emptied, the judge remained seated, staring at the file that no longer looked like just paper. The camera of the story would linger there, the quiet dignity of one woman who didn't let language, laughter, or fear silence what was right. And as Maria stepped out of the courtroom into the cold daylight, her brother's words echoed in her memory. "I have to go," she whispered back, almost smiling. "It's okay." Didn't stop, but the question still lingered in the air, one that even the verdict couldn't erase. Was justice truly served today? Or did mercy simply borrow its name? The courthouse emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back from the shore. People spoke in low voices, glancing at Maria as they passed, unsure whether to offer smiles or silence. She didn't seem to notice. She stood in the aisle, clutching her folder against her chest as though it were a heartbeat she didn't want to lose. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain and pavement. Reporters had gathered on the steps, their microphones and cameras ready. But when Maria appeared, the crowd hesitated. For once, no one shouted questions. They simply parted, creating a narrow path through which she walked quietly, her lawyer beside her. One reporter finally found words. "Ms. Alvarez," he called softly. "How do you feel?" Maria paused. Her eyes lifted to the gray clouds above. "Grateful," she said, "and tired." She smiled faintly. Mostly tired. It was not a victory speech. It was something better, real. That evening, the courthouse lights dimmed one by one. Judge Harrison remained in his chambers long after everyone else had gone. The verdict echoed in his mind like a bell that didn't stop ringing. He had written hundreds of decisions, read thousands of testimonies, but none had followed him into the silence like this one. On his desk sat Maria's folder, left behind by mistake. He opened it gently, as though touching something sacred. Inside were her worn papers, translated letters, safety reports, photos printed on fading ink. One note sat tucked between pages, a grocery receipt, handwritten words scrawled on the back. "Do good, even when no one understands you." He set the note down and leaned back in his chair. Outside his window, the courthouse steps glowed faintly in the streetlights. For the first time in years, he wondered how many people had stood there, waiting to be seen, to be believed, to be heard beyond their accent. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But the silence around him felt like apology. A week later, the story made its way through news outlets and social media. Immigrant woman acquitted after standing up for worker safety. The headlines praised her courage, but most people only skimmed the details. That was fine with Maria. She returned to her routine. Morning coffee, evening bus rides, cleaning offices after hours. The world hadn't changed much, but she had. When people at work asked how the case went, she said simply, "It's finished now." And when they told her she'd been brave, she answered, "I was just speaking." Her brother Luis met her one evening outside the apartment. He had found a new job. Different site, different company. He handed her a small paper bag with sweet bread inside. "For celebration," he said. They sat on the steps, eating quietly, watching traffic pass. He said, "You made them listen." Maria shook her head. "No," she said. "They just stopped laughing long enough to hear." Back in the courthouse, small changes began to appear. A memo from the city safety board ordered surprise inspections for older sites. A poster went up in the break room for court staff. Language is not incompetence. No one mentioned Maria's name, but her presence lingered. in the careful pauses before a judge spoke, in the way clerks looked up when a witness struggled for words instead of rushing them. In one hearing weeks later, a young man with an accent stumbled through his testimony. The gallery chuckled. Judge Harrison tapped his gavel once firmly. "This court will show respect," he said. The laughter died instantly. He caught himself glancing toward the defense table, half expecting to see Maria there again, calm and steady. She wasn't, but the lesson she left behind sat in her place. Maria's life returned to the rhythm it had always known. Mornings at the bakery, afternoons volunteering at the library to help others practice English. Her class was small, just 5 people, all shy in different ways. One woman struggled to say thank you without tripping over the sounds. Maria smiled gently and said, "It doesn't matter how it sounds. People will feel it." Every evening she wrote new words in a notebook, phrases she wanted to learn, but also the ones she never wanted to forget. On the first page she had written, "Please wait, check, live." Sometimes when the wind rattled the window, she thought of the scaffolding, the laughter, the silence that had followed her words. But instead of anger, she felt peace. She had done what she could. She had been heard. 2 months later, an envelope arrived in her mailbox. The handwriting was neat, unfamiliar. Inside was a letter, written on official stationery, but without the coldness of formality. "Dear Ms. Alvarez, I hope you don't mind my writing. I found this while organizing old files. Your folder. I thought it belonged to you, but before returning it, I wanted to thank you. You reminded me that justice isn't only about what's written down. It's about what we're willing to hear, even when the voice trembles. You taught this courtroom, and me, that silence after truth is the loudest kind. I have nothing more to offer than respect." Judge Harrison Maria read the letter twice. She smiled, folded it carefully, and slipped it inside her worn folder beside the grocery receipt. For a long time she sat by the window, the sound of city traffic rising and falling outside. She thought about the judge, the laughter, the courtroom that had turned still like a lake when she spoke, and she whispered, not to him, but to the space between them, "Apology accepted." Months later, a small plaque appeared near the courthouse entrance. It wasn't grand, not even official. Someone had placed it quietly, perhaps a clerk or janitor. The metal plate read, "Courage does not always speak loud. Sometimes it simply refuses to be silent." No one knew who wrote it, but those who had been in that courtroom knew what it meant. Years passed. Maria moved to a smaller town near the coast. She opened a bakery with her brother, small but full of warmth. They named it Pan y Paz, bread and peace. Every morning she watched customers line up. Construction workers, nurses, office clerks, people rushing between jobs, hands full of everything except time. She greeted each one the same way. "Good morning. Please take your time." One afternoon, a young girl came in with her mother. The girl pointed at the photo behind the counter, a picture of Maria and Luis smiling outside their shop. "Is that you?" she asked shyly. Maria nodded. "Yes. You look brave," the girl said. Maria laughed softly. "No, just tired." Then she leaned closer and added, "But sometimes tired people do brave things." When the day ended, Maria locked the door, wiped her hands, and stepped outside. The sun was low, painting the street gold. The wind carried the faint smell of flour and sea salt. She stood still, letting the silence settle around her like an old friend. There was peace in it, not because the world was perfect, but because she had learned something unshakable. It wasn't about winning or losing, about guilt or freedom. It was about being seen, about finding a voice even when words stumbled. And in that still evening air, her story finished itself. Not with applause, but with quiet understanding. The same kind of quiet that had once filled a courtroom after a woman with an accent said something no one expected. The same kind that makes people stop and listen, not because they have to, but because they finally want to. And as the lights came on in her bakery window, soft and golden against the darkening sky, the narrator's voice would fade in, calm and sure. Sometimes the loudest power isn't in how we speak, but in the truth that silence leaves behind.